Question 35. On January 1st, 2020, the city of Hastings creates a solid waste landfill that it expects to reach capacity gradually over the next 20 years. If the landfill were to be closed at the current time, closure costs would be approximately $1.2 million plus additional $700,000 for post-closure work. Of these totals, the city must pay $50,000 on December 31st of each year for preliminary closure work. At the end of 2020, the landfill reaches 3% of capacity. At the end of 2021, the landfill reaches 9% of capacity. At the end of 2021, a reassessment is made. Experts determine total closure cost will be $1.4 million rather than $1.2 million. Question A. Assume the city views a landfill as an enterprise fund. What journal entry should the city make in 2020 and 2021 in preparing government-wide financial statements? If the city views the landfill as an enterprise fund, then we are going to prepare journal entries follow accrual accounting. Doesn't matter whether those journal entries are for government-wide financial statement or fund financial statement. So the journal entry is going to be like this. I already prepared here. At the end of 2020, first we need to recognize this long-term liability, which is the landfill closure liability, which is 3%. So because at the end of 2020, this landfill reaches 3% of capacity, 3% of the total closure cost, which is $1.2 million, plus this additional $0.7 million, in total that's $1.9 million. So that's the total liability would be $57,000. 3% of $1.9 million. At the same time, recognize those liability as the current period expense. So journal entry is debit expense and then credit landfill closure liability. At the same time, because city must pay $50,000 on December 31st of each year for preliminary closure work. So for that, we are going to debit. So those payment is kind of be used to reduce their future liabilities. So we debit landfill closure liability and credit cash of $50,000. So that's the second journal entry at the end of 2020. Then when we move to the end of 2021, and what happened is that first the landfill reaches 9% of capacity. Also, experts made a reassessment and estimate the total closure cost to be $1.4 million rather than $1.2 million. So there's a reassessment. So it looks like the closure cost is increased. So we may need to make some like adjustment entry to recognize this additional liability. And so what I did is that I prepare a T account over here. And at the end of 2020, the city already recognized this $57,000 as their landfill closure liability. But after this reassessment, the new landfill closure liability, based on this current 9% capacity, is going to be $189,000. That equals to 9% of $2.1 million new closure cost. So the new closure cost will be $1.4 million, and plus this $700,000 post closure work. That's 1.9. That's 1.9 million. That's 2.1 million. So 1.4 plus 0.7, that's 2.1. Because it reaches 9%. So 9% times 2.1 million, we get 189,000. And the difference of the adjustment amount is going to be 132,000. And that will be the credit. We credit landfill closure liability 132,000, and same time debit expense to be 132,000 for 2020. And then the second journal entry is to recognize that same $50,000 payment for the preliminary closure work. So debit landfill liability and credit cash. Question B. Assume the city views the landfill as being within the general fund. What journal entries should the city make in 2020 and 2021 in preparing government-wide financial statement? So if the city views the landfill as being within the general fund, and when we prepare journal entries for fund financial statement, we need to follow modified accrual accounting. However, to prepare journal entries for government-wide financial statements, then we also follow accrual accounting, which means that the journal entries we're going to prepare for question B will be the same as what we already prepared for question A. In other words, journal entries are going to be the same. And then for question C, assume the city views the landfill as enterprise fund. What journal entries should the city make in 2020 and 2021 in preparing fund financial statement? So if it is the enterprise fund, then we are going to follow accrual accounting. Doesn't matter whether it's for fund financial statement or government-wide financial statement. Then question D. Assume the city views the landfill as being within the general fund. What journal entries should the city make in 2020 and 2021 in preparing fund financial statement? Then, because it is within the general fund, then to prepare journal entry for fund financial statement, we need to follow modified accrual accounting. And then journal entry is like this. It's going to be the same for both year. We recognize the cash payment for the preliminary closure work. So we debit expenditures 50,000 and credit the cash 50,000 because to follow modified accrual accounting, we only worry about those the transaction impact on the current resources. In other words, the impact on the current liabilities and the current asset. So that's a journal entry for 2020, and for 2021, it's going to be the same. Debit expenditures for the landfill closure preliminary work and credit the cash. As to those landfill closure liabilities, which is long-term liabilities, is not going to be recognized by the general fund for its fund financial statement. However, it will recognized by the government-wide financial statement.